And the latest numbers from Statistics South Africa have revealed that food prices have soared by 14% in the 12 months to March. That represents the biggest annual increase in 14 years. Prices of basic foodstuffs, including milk, eggs and vegetables, have been recording an upward trend recently. And it comes as consumers continue to grapple with the rising cost of living. For more on this, we're joined this morning by former Statistician General, Dr. Padi Lekgotla, joins us via our video link this morning. Dr. Lekgotla, you and I always talk at this time of the year, don't we, when we get these numbers from Statistics South Africa. And we've sort of been able to predict where we are with consumer inflation. It was 6.9% in January, 7% in February, and here we are, 7.1% in March.
Yes, indeed. The inflation is on the rise post the COVID-19 low rates of inflation, which were generally driven by low demand because of the closure of businesses across the world. Now that we are out of that, it looks like the price levels are increasing across the world. So is the case in South Africa.
Yeah.
This comes against a situation in South Africa where we have serious load shedding, lack of water, degradation of infrastructure, and all those compound the difficulty that people face, particularly as far as food is concerned. And this begs the question of how we will manage not only food supply, which obviously farmers provide, but that doesn't mean that there's food security, and the cost of food is increasing, hurting the poor the most.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty, Dr. Lekgotla. As you say, there is a global context to be considered here. Price levels are increasing around the world and in South Africa as well. But of course, the difference in our country is that incredible gap between the rich and poor.
Yes, indeed. And when it comes to, I think we will see a compounding.
Oh dear. I think Dr. Lekgotla may have been impacted by load shedding in that moment. Dr. Lekgotla, you froze for a moment there. Are you back? Can you hear me?
I'm back probably by just mentioning the word energy. The juju bed came and struck my system.
Yeah, the system got a bit of a shock. Please continue.
There's electricity now, yes. Yeah. I was saying that for us, there might be, we'll see the energy prices probably also increasing, particularly from the purchase of the things like solar panels, wind and all that. Energy prices will increase. And for energy that doesn't exist, you know, that's the paradox of the whole thing. That will compound the prices that we'll face. And the absence of energy itself, you see in households where water is being affected and the storage has declined. The water storages are low or almost empty because there is no electricity pumping water into the storage. So the price of water, particularly administered prices such as electricity, come into play. And when you look at public transport as well, it has increased significantly in terms of the cost of living in the inflation basket.
I mean, it just feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 6 steps back, because the issues are compounded, right? You're here on the program to talk about consumer inflation and the fact that it's edging higher. But here you are also outlining the very many other ways that the poor in our country are being impacted by the energy crisis, the cost of food, housing, water, transport prices are also impacted. When we talk about the cycle of poverty, Dr. Lekgotla, we can sort of get some insight just from your last answer on why that cycle exists.
The cycle exists because I don't think we have an economic or social policy that is coherent. I mean, the 1.2 trillion that we have been hunting has not shown in the gross fixed capital formation, which should have shown injection. But the pledges are said to be subscribed money. I mean, we haven't seen this money in the bank. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these things are just fanfare and not really bringing economic inputs into what we need in the country. 1.2 trillion, I don't see it in the gross fixed capital formation. It should show is that. You said 2 steps forward, 6 steps backward. I think we are just on a 6-7 steps backward. There's no step forward. That's the unfortunate situation. And part of it is the absence, absolutely positive, of any rigorous policy discourse, be it economic or social. For instance, the president was saying that a big basic income grant will be considered and will be positively acceded to. But when you do that only on one pillar of social policy without looking at the macroeconomic policies, you are not going to get it. Or trade and industry, and look at this as a system, the absence of tools to try and grasp what economic and social policy mean in South Africa. It's of tragic proportions. And this has been going on for just too long. When economy in desperate need, for society in desperate need of getting out of this massive challenges, you need a system of planning, a system of organizing society that is coherent and by its nature is complex. And if we don't have tools of managing complexity, we cannot have even one step forward. It will always be these kinds of steps backward all the time, reflected therefore in high inflation rates, including and mostly driven by food, impacting on the poor massive.
Yeah. We've been talking about the lack of urgency in dealing with the load shedding crisis. You've now mentioned the absence of any kind of rigorous policy to try and address the economic situation that our country is in at the moment. It's a tragedy, Dr. Lekgotla, because, you know, in our reporting this morning on the program, we've been talking about the National Food Nutrition Program and the fact that a new service provider was brought in. It left thousands, tens of thousands of students who rely on that food program for their only meal of the day. It left them destitute as they started the second term just last week. Again now, with these new numbers from Statistics South Africa, we're seeing the most vulnerable of our country essentially priced out of accessing any kind of healthy food. So like with the load shedding crisis, where there seems to be a lot of meetings taking place, but no real urgency, do you find that it's the same thing insofar as addressing the poverty burden in our country is concerned?
Well, I think government is notorious for organizing meetings and then putting files side by side, and they think that's a plan. Absolutely, to manage complexity, we have to have a system that manages that complexity. You cannot put files side by side and say it's a plan. There's no relationship between what we have as investment sessions that we have that the government likes so much and what happens on the ground. I mean, people price in a number of things, and we see inventories being released in the system, and we think that's new money. And that's why you see gross fixed capital formation being flat over the last 60 months. Or even over the last 24 to 30 quarters. So the paucity of analysis, it's absolutely deleterious. I don't have words to explain how absolutely pandemically ineffective the government has become in the face of the crisis that we face, and that requires serious leadership of economic analysis, economic understanding, and the Marshall Plan, so to say. We don't see any sense of urgency, including on the matters of energy at ESCOM or energy anywhere else. What we see are people who are greedy and ready to steal and continue to steal and do other things that are absolutely against the spirit of the RDP that we were embarking on as early as 1994. So our economic policies continue to be neoliberal, and in that respect, we even ignore people who are in the advisory committee of the president, like Masukatu, who talks about an entrepreneurial state that uses its assets, such as ESCOM, such as SAA, such as Transnet, such as those to mitigate and interface with the private sector. So by destruction of the public sector instruments for making sure that we are not only regulatory in terms of orientation, but we are developmental in terms of orientation of the country if we are to become a developmental state. That we are actually not. We talk right and we move left. That's the crisis that this country faces.
The devastating irony of having the fifth investment conference just earlier this month, Dr. Lekgotla, in the face of stage 6 load shedding, right in the middle of stage 6 load shedding. I feel quite devastated around the conversation we're having this morning because it's difficult to see any light at the end of this tunnel that we're in. Can you tell us anything, Doc, about the future and something that we can end off our conversation on this morning?
Well, I mean, we brought Professor Maisetsenko, who has something called M-cycle. The Maisetsenko cycle is based on Tesla's free energy. That energy is in the air. And Tesla wrote about this 200 years ago. Maisetsenko has made this his work life for the past 60 years and has transformed that into instruments that demonstrate and are implemented in harvesting the free energy in the air by using techniques that through indirect evaporative cooling is able to cool from wet bulb to dew point. And these interventions can help mitigate the situation in South Africa, particularly in guzzlers of data centers that guzzle a lot of energy. They can actually save 90% of the energy bill that they have at the moment. And today, if they implement Maisetsenko, that will relieve at least ESCOM of the burden of power. But also at ESCOM itself, the Maisetsenko cycle can actually work. In fact, the Maisetsenko cycle techniques are applied in Iran, but on gas turbines. They are applied in China on the cooling towers through pre-cooling using these techniques. Our researchers, our community is so blind to these cutting-edge technologies that bring in new civilizations. And that, to me, if ESCOM was what it was to 1933 for the poor Afrikaners, Maisetsenko cycle energy systems that bring civilization to the world are what we are to South Africa's black poor. This is what can lift society in South Africa and elsewhere in the world into a better situation because of the M-cycle discovery or at least implementation of tools that bring energy to the poor.
M-cycle, you've given me some reading for the day ahead. Dr. Lekgotla, let me thank you for your time this morning.